The howling wind of cryosis cut through the air like shattered glass. Colonel James Mason stood motionless, blood trickling from a gash above his left eye, staring up at the towering figure before him. Queen Zyra's scaled skin shimmered like fire, even in the dim light of the frozen outpost, her copper hair whipping around her face as she leveled her plasma spear at his chest. "You humans," she spat, golden eyes narrowing. "So small, so fragile, hardly worth the effort to kill." Mason's weathered face broke into an unexpected smile. "Then why," he said quietly, "are you carrying my child?" Shock rippled across Zira's alien features. Behind her, her guards shifted nervously, weapons half raised. "Impossible," she whispered. Mason's smile widened as he stepped forward. "Nothing's impossible, Your Majesty. I thought you'd have learned that by now." The scene faded to black, the words 72 hours earlier appearing in stark white text against the darkness. Colonel James Mason sat in the quiet of his Montana cabin, watching the snow fall outside his window. At 58, his face was mapped with the lines of a man who had seen too much war. His once dark hair had surrendered to gray, but his piercing blue eyes remained sharp, missing nothing. On the mantel sat medals from Desert Storm and Kosovo, reminders of battles he'd rather forget. The soft chime of his secure comm unit broke the silence. Mason frowned. That particular tone hadn't sounded in 3 years, not since his retirement from the United Earth Defense Force. "Mason," he answered, his voice gravel against silk. "Colonel." General Richard's voice was as crisp as the day Mason had served under him in the Gulf. "We need you for one last mission." Mason's laugh was dry, humorless. "You said that last time, Richard. This is different. The Zarathian situation is a diplomatic problem," Mason cut in. "I'm a soldier, not a diplomat." The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken history. "We've lost contact with the monitoring station on cryosis," Richards finally said. "Intelligence suggests Zarathian involvement. If they're violating the peace accord—" Mason closed his eyes. The Zarathian war had claimed too many lives before the tenuous peace 4 years ago. A peace he'd helped secure at great cost. "I'm sending coordinates," Richards continued. "The Aurora leaves in 18 hours. Captain Collins will brief you on arrival." "You're not giving me much choice, are you? You're the only one they might listen to, James, the only human they respect." Mason looked at the old photo on his desk, himself and his team on Mars before the final battle that ended the war, before half of them came home in body bags. "Fine," he said finally. "One last mission, then I'm done. For good this time." "Thank you, James." Mason ended the call, staring at the falling snow. Something in his gut told him this mission would be different. He just didn't know how different yet. The Aurora cut through the blackness of space, its antimatter engines a soft blue glow against the void. Mason stood at the viewport, watching the stars blur as they prepared for the jump to the cryosis system. Behind him, the door hissed open. Captain Emma Collins entered, her uniform crisp, her posture military perfect. At 32, she was everything the new UEDF wanted, brilliant, tech-savvy, and untested in real combat. "Colonel Mason," she said, offering a salute he didn't return. "It's an honor to meet you, sir. Your tactics at the Battle of Mars are still taught at the Academy." Mason turned from the viewport. "Save the hero worship, Captain. Brief me on the mission." If she was offended, she didn't show it. She activated a holographic display between them, showing a frozen planet orbiting a distant sun. "Cryosis," she said. "Uninhabitable except for a small zone at the equator. We established Monitoring Station Alpha there 3 years ago as part of the Peace Accord neutral ground for diplomatic meetings with the Zarathians." The display shifted to show a small metallic outpost nestled in an icy valley. 2 weeks ago, all communication ceased. No distress call, no warning. Just silence. "And you think the Zarathians are responsible?" Mason asked. "Intelligence intercepted increased Zarathian activity in the sector before communications went dark. But there's something else." She hesitated. "The last transmission contained fragments of data, biological readings unlike anything we've seen before." Mason's eyes narrowed. "The Zarathians are experimenting again." "Possibly. That's why we need you. You know them better than anyone." "I know how to kill them," Mason corrected. "That doesn't mean I understand them." Collins's gaze didn't waver. "You negotiated the peace, sir. That counts for something." Mason turned back to the viewport. "Who else is on the team?" 6 Marines, all top of their class. Lieutenant Parker, our tech specialist, Dr. Chen, xenobiologist. Kids, Mason muttered. You're sending me in with kids. They're the best we have, Colonel. Mason didn't respond. In his experience, the best meant little when faced with the Zorathian warrior. Each one stood 8 feet tall with scaled skin that could deflect standard bullets and strength that could crush a human skull with one hand. Get some rest, Colonel, Collins said, moving toward the door. We jump in 6 hours. When she was gone, Mason pulled out an old worn compass, a gift from his father who had fought in Vietnam. The needle spun uselessly in the magnetic field of the ship, just as Mason felt his own moral compass spinning at the thought of facing the Zorathians again. Some wounds never healed. Some enemies never became friends. Mason jerked awake as alarms blared throughout the ship. He was moving before his conscious mind registered the danger years of combat training taking over. The deck beneath him shuddered violently. All hands to emergency stations. Collins's voice came over the comm. We have a critical system failure. This is not a drill. Mason grabbed his tactical vest and sidearm, bursting into the corridor where chaos reigned. Crewmen ran in all directions as red emergency lights bathed everything in an apocalyptic glow. He fought his way to the bridge where Collins was frantically working at the main console. Report, Mason barked. Main navigation's gone haywire, she said without looking up. Life support systems failing. Engine controls compromised. We're under attack. Negative. It's internal, some kind of virus in the system. Her fingers flew over the controls. It's taking over everything. Wait. Her face paled. Colonel, the virus? It's UEDF encryption. This came from inside. Mason felt a cold dread that had nothing to do with the failing life support. Someone wants us to fail. Can you get control back? I'm trying to isolate critical systems, but a violent explosion rocked the ship, throwing Mason against the bulkhead. We've lost the antimatter containment. We need to evacuate. How long? Minutes, maybe less. Mason hit the ship-wide comm. All personnel to escape pods. This is not a drill move. The next few minutes were a blur of motion and shouted orders. Mason helped the young Marines into the escape pods, then went back for the science team. Dr. Chen was trapped in her lab when a secondary explosion collapsed part of the ceiling. Go, she shouted as Mason tried to reach her. The data, I've uploaded it to your personal comm. It's important. Before Mason could respond, flames engulfed the lab. There was nothing he could do. At the last escape pod, Captain Collins waited. Everyone else out? Mason asked, ducking into the cramped space beside her. All accounted for except Dr. Chen. Collins' face was grim as she initiated the launch sequence. We're the last ones. The pod ejected with a violent lurch just as the Aurora's reactor reached critical mass. Through the small viewport, Mason watched the ship he'd boarded just hours ago erupt into a miniature sun before the blast wave hit their pod, sending it tumbling toward the icy surface of cryosis. Brace for impact, Collins shouted, but her voice was lost as the pod's system shorted out, plunging them into darkness and silence. The last thing Mason saw was the white expanse of cryosis rising to meet them. Consciousness returned to Mason in painful fragments. Cold. So cold, it burned. The taste of blood in his mouth. The smell of fried electronics and smoke. The sound of wind howling through twisted metal. He forced his eyes open. The escape pod lay in ruins, split open like a sardine can. Beyond the jagged opening, the blizzard raged, snow already beginning to cover the wreckage. Collins lay slumped in her harness, a nasty gash across her forehead. Mason checked her pulse, weak, but there. Collins, he said, shaking her gently. Captain, wake up. Her eyes fluttered open, disoriented. Colonel, did we make it? We're down, but in one piece. Mostly. He helped her unbuckle. Can you move? She nodded, wincing. The others? Mason's face darkened. I don't know. Our pod was thrown off course by the explosion. We need to find shelter before this storm gets worse. He rummaged through the pod's emergency supplies, finding a med kit, emergency rations, a distress beacon, and 2 thermal survival suits rated for extreme cold. They'd need them. Cryosis was one of the coldest habitable planets ever discovered, with average temperatures of -70 degrees Celsius. As they donned the suits, Mason found a small tracking device hidden under the navigation panel. It was military grade, but not standard issue. Someone had planted it. Look at this, he said, showing Collins. Someone wanted to make sure we didn't make it here alive, or if we did, they wanted to know exactly where we landed. Collins examined the device, her expression hardening. UEDF technology. This confirms it. We were sabotaged from inside. The question is by whom and why. They had no answers, only the immediate problem of survival. With the supplies they could salvage strapped to their backs, they ventured into the blinding snowstorm. The landscape of Cryosis was a monochrome nightmare of white and gray. Wind-sculpted ice formations rose like alien monuments from the endless plains of snow. Visibility extended barely 10 feet ahead. Every step was a battle against the gale-force winds that threatened to knock them down. Mason led the way using his old military training to navigate by the faint glimmer of the system's distant sun, occasionally visible through breaks in the clouds. His mind raced with questions. Who had sabotaged the Aurora? What had happened to the monitoring station, and what data had Dr. Chen sacrificed herself to preserve? After an hour of trudging through knee-deep snow, Collins stumbled, falling face first into a drift. "I can't," she gasped as Mason pulled her up. "Need to rest." "No rest," Mason said firmly. "Rest means death in these conditions. Keep moving." But even as he spoke, he knew they were in trouble. The temperature was dropping as night approached. Without shelter, they wouldn't survive until morning. Then, through a momentary clearing in the storm, Mason saw a faint glow on the horizon. Too steady to be natural. "There," he pointed. "Light, man-made or Zorathian, I don't care. It's our only chance." With renewed purpose, they changed direction, fighting against the wind toward the distant glow. As they drew closer, Mason began to make out the distinctive architecture, angular crystalline structures that seemed to grow from the ice itself, not human design. "It's Zorathian," he said grimly, "a military outpost by the look of it." "Are we surrendering?" Collins asked, teeth chattering. Mason checked his sidearm. "We're seeking shelter under the terms of the peace accord. But stay alert. Peace is a relative concept out here." They approached the perimeter of the outpost where crystalline towers rose 50 feet into the air, glowing with an inner blue-green light that pulsed like a heartbeat. No guards were visible, but Mason knew they were being watched. Zorathians never left their territory undefended. As if to confirm his thoughts, the snow before them erupted as three massive figures rose from concealed positions. 8 feet tall, with scaled skin that shimmered with iridescent patterns, the Zorathian warriors trained plasma spears at their hearts. Their golden eyes glowed in the darkness, pupils contracted to slits. Mason slowly raised his hands, motioning for Collins to do the same. "I am Colonel James Mason, United Earth Defense Force," he said clearly, knowing they understood English. "We seek temporary sanctuary under Article 7 of the Peace Accord between our peoples." The central warrior stepped forward, his scales shifting to a deeper red, a sign of suspicion or aggression. Mason couldn't remember which. "The human who fought at Mars," the warrior said, his voice resonating with subharmonics that made Mason's chest vibrate. "Your name is known to us." "Then you know I respect the peace," Mason replied steadily. The warrior was silent for a long moment, then touched a communication device on his armor. He spoke rapidly in the clicking musical language of the Zorathians. After what seemed like an eternity, he gestured toward the central structure. "You will be escorted to the command center. Her Majesty will decide your fate." "Her Majesty," Collins whispered as they were led between the warriors. Mason's blood ran cold. There was only one Zorathian referred to as Her Majesty in this sector. "Queen Zera," he said quietly, "leader of the Southern Armada, sister of General Krell." "Krell, the one who died at Mars," Mason finished, his face grim. "By my hand." The interior of the Zorathian outpost was surprisingly warm, the walls glowing with the same blue-green bioluminescence as the exterior towers. Corridors twisted in organic patterns that seemed to defy human architectural logic, branching and rejoining like blood vessels in some vast body. Their escorts led them to a circular chamber at the heart of the structure. The ceiling soared 30 feet above a dome of what looked like ice but didn't melt in the warmth. In the center of the room stood a raised dais, and upon it a throne that appeared to be grown rather than built from the same crystalline material as the rest of the outpost. And on that throne sat Queen Zera. Even seated, her height was intimidating. Her scaled skin was a deeper red than the warrior's almost burgundy, with patterns that pulsed with golden light when she moved. Her face was more angular than human, with high cheekbones and a proud jawline, but still recognizably humanoid. Her eyes, however, were alien golden irises with vertical pupils that widened slightly as she regarded the humans before her. Copper-colored hair so fine it seemed almost like silk flowed down her shoulders, adorned with small, crystalline ornaments that chimed softly when she moved. She wore armor that seemed to be a second skin form-fitting, yet clearly protective, with sections that glowed with the same energy as their weapons. A circlet of some unknown metal sat upon her brow, symbols etched into its surface. "Colonel James Mason," she said, her voice melodious, yet carrying an undercurrent of danger. "The Butcher of Mars stands before me, seeking sanctuary." Mason kept his expression neutral, despite the insult. "I am a soldier who followed orders, Your Majesty, as did your brother." A ripple of tension passed through the guards. Zyra's scales flashed briefly with patterns of crimson and gold anger, Mason guessed. "You dare speak of him," she hissed, rising to her full height. Standing, she towered over Mason by at least 2 feet. "You who led the assault that took his life." "I led the defense that responded to his attack," Mason corrected, meeting her gaze. "An attack that violated the ceasefire negotiations already underway." Zyra descended from her dais with fluid grace that belied her size. She circled Mason, slowly examining him as one might examine an unusual specimen. "You humans," she said softly, "so fragile in body, yet so dangerous in your deceptions. My brother believed the ceasefire was a ruse to allow your forces to regroup. It seems he was correct, given your presence here now." "We came to investigate the silence from our monitoring station," Collins interjected. "Our ship was sabotaged. We're not here as aggressors." Zyra's attention shifted to Collins, her golden eyes narrowing. "And who might you be, small one?" "Captain Emma Collins, UEDF Science Division." "Science," Zyra repeated, as if tasting the word. "Always your excuse for espionage." She returned to her throne, settling into it with regal poise. For several moments she simply observed them, her scales shifting through subtle patterns of color that Mason couldn't interpret. "The peace between our peoples is fragile," she finally said. "Some among my people and yours, I suspect, would prefer it broken." "Was that the purpose of your mission, Colonel? To provoke an incident that would justify renewed conflict?" "No," Mason said firmly. "If I wanted conflict, I wouldn't have helped negotiate the peace in the first place." Zyra tilted her head, studying him with renewed interest. "Yet here you are on a planet where you should not be in an outpost you should never have found." "Our ship was sabotaged," Mason repeated. "We had no choice but to land here. All we ask is sanctuary until the storm passes, then we'll try to locate our people and leave." Zyra was silent for a long moment, her scales now pulsing with a slow, steady pattern of blue and green. Finally she spoke. "You will be granted conditional sanctuary as the Accord demands, but you will be confined to the guest quarters and monitored at all times. Any attempt to access our systems or communicate with your forces will be considered an act of aggression." She fixed Mason with her golden stare. "And Colonel, know this, unlike humans, Zorathians never forget their blood debts. My brother's death remains unpaid." She gestured to the guards. "Take them to the South Quadrant. Provide food and medical attention, but watch them closely." As they were led away, Mason glanced back to see Zyra watching him, her scales now glowing with a pattern he hadn't seen before. Not anger or suspicion, but something else entirely. Something that made him uneasy in a way the threats had not. "That went well," Collins muttered, as they were escorted down another twisting corridor. "She didn't kill us outright," Mason agreed. "That's something." "She blames you personally for her brother's death." Mason's expression darkened. "Krell led a surprise attack on our Mars base after ceasefire talks had begun. 2,000 civilians died. I did what was necessary to stop him. And now his sister holds our lives in her hands," Collins said. "I don't like those odds." Neither did Mason. But as they were shown to a chamber that, while clearly designed for beings larger than humans, was comfortably appointed, he began to wonder. The Zorathians could have left them to die in the storm. They could have executed them as spies. Instead, they were being treated as official guests, albeit under guard. Queen Zyra was playing a longer game than simple revenge, and Mason needed to figure out what it was before it was too late. The guest quarters were a single large chamber with what passed for Zorathian furniture, low crystalline platforms that served as beds, strange curved structures that might have been chairs and a table-like surface that emerged seamlessly from the floor. The walls pulsed with the same bioluminescence as the rest of the facility, providing soft, constant light. A guard brought them food nutrient cubes that, while bland, were compatible with human physiology. Another brought medical supplies for their injuries. Then they were left alone, though Mason had no doubt they were being monitored. Once Collins had treated the gash on her head, she slumped onto one of the crystal platforms. "I need to rest," she said. "Wake me in a few hours." Mason nodded, watching as she quickly fell into an exhausted sleep. He took the opportunity to explore their prison, examining every inch of the walls, floor, and ceiling. The door had no visible lock mechanism. Zarathian technology often used biometric controls tuned to their unique biological signatures. As he expected, they were trapped. But the captivity gave him time to think. He pulled out his personal comm unit, the one Dr. Chen had uploaded data to before her death. The Zarathians hadn't confiscated it, perhaps believing it wouldn't function within their facility. In many ways, they were right. It couldn't communicate beyond these walls, but it could still access its internal memory. The files were encrypted, but Mason had been given emergency override codes for just such a situation. What he found made his blood run cold. Dr. Chen had been analyzing biological samples from cryosis samples that showed evidence of genetic experimentation. The Zarathians appeared to be developing a new kind of biological weapon, one that could potentially target specific human genetic markers. This violated at least 3 provisions of the peace accord. If this information reached Earth, it could restart the war, a war humanity had barely survived the first time. But something didn't add up. Why would Zira allow them sanctuary if the Zarathians were conducting illegal weapons research here? She would have had every reason to eliminate witnesses. Mason dug deeper into the files. The genetic sequences weren't just targeted at humans, they also contained modified Zarathian DNA. Were they developing a weapon that could harm both species? That made even less sense. A soft chime interrupted his thoughts. The door to their chamber was opening. Mason quickly pocketed the comm unit as a Zarathian guard entered. "Her Majesty commands your presence," the guard said, addressing Mason alone. "Only you." Mason glanced at the still sleeping Collins. "My colleague remains here. You alone are summoned." Something in the guard's tone made it clear this wasn't a request. Mason nodded, following the towering figure through the twisting corridors of the outpost. Instead of returning to the throne room, Mason was led deeper into the facility, past areas where Zarathian scientists worked at stations made of the same crystalline material as everything else. They regarded him with open curiosity or hostility as he passed. Finally, they arrived at a small chamber that appeared to be a private study. Queen Zyra stood with her back to the door, examining a 3-dimensional holographic display of what looked like molecular structures. "Leave us," she commanded the guard, who bowed and departed. For a long moment, she didn't acknowledge Mason's presence, continuing to manipulate the holographic molecules with graceful gestures of her long, scaled fingers. Finally, without turning, she spoke. "Do you know why we fought your kind, Colonel?" "Resources," Mason replied. "Territory, the usual reasons species go to war." Zira made a sound that might have been a laugh. "So simple, your understanding." "No, we fought because your genetic structure fascinated our scientists. Humans adapt so quickly, evolve so rapidly compared to us. We wish to understand this trait." She turned to face him, her golden eyes unreadable. "Did you ever wonder why we agreed to peace? We were winning." The question caught Mason off guard. It was true the Zarathians had been pushing humanity back on all fronts when they suddenly agreed to ceasefire talks. "I assumed your casualties were higher than we estimated," he said carefully. "Our casualties were acceptable," she replied dismissively. "No, we stopped because we had obtained what we needed, genetic samples from thousands of human prisoners, enough to conduct our research without further conflict." Mason felt a chill that had nothing to do with the planet's temperature. "You're creating a bioweapon." Zira's scales flickered with patterns that might have indicated amusement. "Is that what your scientists concluded from her stolen samples? How predictably human to assume the worst." She gestured to the holographic display. "This is not a weapon, Colonel. It is the future, a way to end conflict between our species permanently. By changing us or eliminating us, by understanding the fundamental biological barriers that make our species incompatible," she said, studying him intently. Humans and Zorathians cannot reproduce together. Our biochemistry is too different. This creates an unbridgeable gap between our peoples. We will always see each other, as potential enemies rather than potential kin. Mason stared at the display, beginning to understand. You're trying to create hybrids, Zorathian human crosses. We are exploring the possibilities, she corrected. A theoretical exercise permitted under the scientific cooperation clause of our treaty. Theoretical. Mason didn't believe it for a second. Then why the secrecy? Why was our monitoring station silenced? Zira's scales darkened. Your monitoring station discovered our research facility and misinterpreted its purpose just as you have. They attempted to steal our data. In the process, they triggered our automated defense systems. They're dead. Unfortunately, yes. An automated response we could not countermand in time. Her expression was unreadable. Their bodies have been preserved according to the protocols of the Accord. When communication is restored, they will be returned to Earth. Mason processed this information, not sure if he believed her explanation. And our ship, the Aurora, was that an automated response too? We had nothing to do with your ship's malfunction, Zira said sharply, though its timing was convenient for certain factions within both our governments who prefer conflict to cooperation. What are you suggesting? Zira moved closer, towering over him. This close, Mason could see the intricate patterns in her scales, the subtle shifts of color that seemed to reflect her thoughts. I am suggesting, Colonel Mason, that neither of us may be here by accident, that perhaps those who wish the peace to fail engineered this situation. To what end? To restart a war that benefits weapons manufacturers and power-hungry military leaders on both sides, she said bluntly. My brother was manipulated into attacking your Mars base by advisors who assured him Earth was preparing a major offensive. I suspect similar manipulations are at work now. Mason thought of the tracking device he'd found in the escape pod, the virus that had taken down a state-of-the-art military vessel with ease. It was starting to make a terrible kind of sense. If you believe that, he said carefully, why tell me? Why not just eliminate us as potential complications? Zira's scales shifted to a pattern Mason hadn't seen before, bands of blue and purple that pulsed slowly across her body. Because you intrigue me, Colonel, she said, her voice softer now. You fought fiercely against my kind, yet you worked harder than anyone to secure peace. You killed my brother, yet you did so to protect your people, not out of hatred for mine. You are a contradiction. She returned to the holographic display, shutting it down with a gesture. Return to your quarters. Consider what I have said. Tomorrow perhaps we will speak again. As the guard reappeared to escort him back, Mason realized that Queen Zira was indeed playing a longer game than he had imagined. He just wasn't sure yet whether he was a player or a pawn. Mason had just finished briefing Collins on his strange conversation with Queen Zira when the first tremor shook the outpost. Fine crystalline dust sifted down from the ceiling as the floor vibrated beneath their feet. Earthquake, Collins suggested. Mason shook his head. This planet is geologically stable. That was... A second more violent tremor cut him off, followed by a distant sound like thunder. Alarm calls began to echo through the facility, the musical Zorathian language taking on urgent staccato tones. The door to their chamber slid open, revealing their guard in a state of agitation, scales flashing with rapid patterns of red and orange. Stay here, the guard ordered. The outpost is under attack. Attack by whom? Mason demanded. Our forces, the guard's expression. If Zorathian facial movements could be called that, it suggested he was asking himself the same question. Without answering, he sealed the door, leaving them alone again. This doesn't make sense, Collins said, steadying herself against the wall as another tremor shook the room. UEDF wouldn't attack a Zorathian outpost, not with the peace this fragile. Unless someone wants to break the peace, Mason replied, grimly, remembering Zira's words about factions within both governments. We need to get out of here. He began examining the door mechanism more carefully, looking for any weakness. Zorathian technology was advanced, but it was designed for Zorathian physiology. Sometimes that created unexpected vulnerabilities. The next impact was close enough to throw them both to the floor. Part of the ceiling collapsed, revealing conduits filled with a glowing blue-green liquid, the organic technology that powered Zorathian facilities. Mason saw his opportunity. Using a broken fragment of the crystal furniture, he punctured one of the conduits. The fluid that spurted out had the consistency of syrup, glowing brightly where it touched the air. Working quickly, he smeared it around the doorframe, concentrating on what appeared to be sensor nodes. "What are you doing?" Collins asked, coughing in the dust. "Zorathian tech responds to their biochemical signatures," Mason explained. "This fluid carries those signatures. Might fool the door into Femom." With a soft chime, the door slid open. "Thinking we're authorized," he finished with grim satisfaction. "Let's go." The corridor outside was chaos. Zorathian warriors ran past weapons ready, while technicians worked frantically to repair damaged systems. No one paid attention to the two humans slipping out of their chamber. They made their way toward what Mason believed was the outpost command center, using the confusion as cover. Through gaps in the damaged structure, they could see outside where the blizzard had temporarily abated to reveal a nightmarish scene. A massive creature moved through the snow, its form obscured by ice and darkness, but clearly huge, at least 30 feet tall, with the multiple limbs that seemed to phase between solid and vapor states. Where it touched the outpost's outer structures, they frosted over and shattered. "What the hell is that?" Collins whispered. "Frost behemoth," Mason said, recalling xenobiology briefings from years ago. "Native to Cryosis. Normally they stay in the polar regions, but something must have drawn this one to the equator. The outpost. Maybe, or maybe something the Zorathians are doing here." They reached a junction where four corridors met in a circular hub. Through one passage, they could see the command center where Queen Zira stood, amidst her officers issuing rapid orders as displays showed the creature's movements around the facility. "We should try to reach our escape pod," Collins suggested. "Use the distraction to get away." Mason was about to agree when a section of the outer wall suddenly caved inward, sending shards of crystal flying like shrapnel. A massive ghostly limb materialized through the breach, its surface crystallizing the air around it. Zorathian warriors opened fire with plasma weapons, but the creature seemed to shift its density at will, allowing the energy blast to pass through it harmlessly. It lashed out, catching two warriors and instantly freezing them solid. Through the chaos, Mason saw Queen Zira step forward, drawing a weapon unlike any he had seen before, a staff that glowed with internal fire, the antithesis of the ice creature's power. She wielded it with practiced skill, creating a barrier of heat that momentarily forced the creature back. But as she pressed her advantage, the floor beneath her gave way, weakened by the creature's cold aura. Zira felt the fiery staff spinning from her grasp. Without conscious thought, Mason found himself running toward her. Later, he would question why he didn't seize the opportunity to escape. In that moment, he only knew that if Zira died, any hope for peace died with her. He reached her as the behemoth's limb descended toward the fallen queen. Using all his strength, he dragged her clear of the attack, the creature's limb striking the floor where she had lain only seconds before turning it to brittle ice. Zira's golden eyes met his wide with surprise. For a frozen moment, they stared at each other. Enemies turned allies by circumstance. Then Mason spotted her fallen weapon. Rolling away from another attack, he snatched up the staff, feeling it hum with power in his hands. It was designed for someone much larger, but the principle seemed simple enough: direct the energy outward. He aimed at the creature's central mass and released the built-up power in a concentrated burst. The beam struck the behemoth where its form was most solid, creating a high-pitched keening as ice met fire. Steam exploded outward, temporarily blinding everyone. When visibility returned, the creature had retreated, leaving a gaping hole in the outpost wall, through which the howling blizzard now returned. Mason stood amidst the destruction, the staff still humming in his hands, as Zorathian warriors surrounded him, their weapons trained on his heart. He carefully lowered the staff, placing it on the ground, and raised his hands in surrender. Zira rose to her feet, her scales shifting with rapid patterns of blue-gold and colors Mason couldn't name. She approached him slowly, her expression unreadable to human eyes. "You could have escaped," she said, her voice barely audible above the wind. "Instead, you saved my life." "I'm a soldier," Mason replied simply, "not an assassin." For a long moment, she regarded him with those alien golden eyes. Then, to the shock of everyone present, she inclined her head, the Zorathian equivalent of a bow. "Perhaps," she said, "we have more to discuss than I first thought, Colonel Mason." The warriors lowered their weapons, uncertainty evident in their postures. Zira retrieved her staff, then gestured for Mason to follow her. As he did, he caught sight of Collins, who had remained hidden during the confrontation. She gave him a subtle nod she would stay hidden a backup plan if things went wrong. Mason hoped they wouldn't. For the first time since landing on this frozen hell, he felt something unexpected stirring within him. Hope. The blizzard howled through the gaping breach in the outpost wall, ice crystals swirling like miniature daggers in the air. Zorathian technicians worked frantically to seal the opening with emergency force fields, the translucent energy barriers shimmering as they solidified against the brutal cold. Queen Zira led Mason through the damaged command center, her scales still pulsing with unusual patterns of blue and gold. The Zorathian warriors parted before them, their expressions unreadable to human eyes, but their body language speaking volumes: confusion, suspicion, and something that might have been fear. Not fear of their queen, Mason realized. Fear of change. Zira paused before a crystalline doorway that pulsed with biometric sensors. She pressed her scaled palm against it, the patterns on her skin synchronizing with those on the door, until it slid open, revealing a private chamber beyond. "Enter," she commanded, her voice carrying that distinctive Zorathian harmonic that Mason felt more than heard. The room was clearly Zyra's personal quarters, larger than their detention cell, with furnishings that blended the crystalline architecture of the outpost with objects that appeared almost ceremonial. A wall displayed weapons of various designs, some clearly ancient. Another held what looked like star charts, but configured in a way Mason's human mind struggled to interpret. Zira sealed the door behind them. For a moment, she simply stood there, studying Mason with those golden, vertical pupilled eyes. "You continue to surprise me, Colonel," she finally said. "First at Mars, where you defeated my brother with tactics no Zorathian would have conceived. Now here, where you risk your life for your enemy." "Is that what we are?" Mason asked quietly. "Enemies." Zira's scales shifted to a deeper blue. "What would you call us? Survivors," Mason said simply. "Of a war neither of us started." A sound emerged from Zira that Mason couldn't immediately identify, a rhythmic vibration that he eventually realized was laughter, though nothing like human laughter. "Survivors," she repeated, moving to what appeared to be a food preparation area. She extracted 2 containers from a recessed compartment. "An accurate assessment." She handed one container to Mason. Inside was a liquid that glowed faintly blue. "It is compatible with human physiology," she assured him, "a nutrient suspension." Mason hesitated only briefly before taking a cautious sip. The liquid was warm with a taste like nothing he'd experienced before, something between honey and salt with undertones of citrus. Not unpleasant, but definitely alien. "Thank you," he said, "for the drink and for not killing me back there." "I could say the same," Zira replied, consuming her own portion in a single graceful motion. "The staff weapon you wielded against the behemoth is calibrated to my biological signature. It should have burned your hands to bone, yet you controlled it." Mason looked down at his hands. The skin was reddened but intact. "Lucky, I guess." "Zorathians do not believe in luck, Colonel. We believe in patterns, causality, purpose." Her golden eyes fixed on him with renewed intensity. "Your presence here has purpose beyond coincidence." Before Mason could respond, the chamber's communication system chimed. Zira touched a crystalline node on the wall, and a holographic display materialized between them. A Zorathian military officer appeared, his scales patterns indicating urgency. "My queen," he said, bowing his head, "we have detected approaching vessels. 2 signatures, one Zorathian, one human." Mason felt a jolt of both hope and dread. Rescue or the next phase of someone's plan to shatter the peace. "How long until arrival?" Zira demanded. "The storm is interfering with precise calculations, but approximately 6 hours for the Zorathian vessel, 8 for the human. Maintain monitoring. Alert me to any communication attempts. No response without my direct authorization." The officer bowed again and the display vanished. Zira turned to Mason, her scales now pulsing with rapid patterns of red and orange, concern perhaps, or calculation. "It appears our isolation is ending," she said. "The question becomes, are these ships coming to rescue us or eliminate us? You think they might be hostile? Your own people?" Zira's expression hardened. "Not all Zorathians embrace the peace, Colonel, just as not all humans did. My brother was part of a faction that believed coexistence with your kind was impossible." She gestured to the star charts on the wall. They believe our destiny is to rule this sector alone. And the human ship, perhaps your General Richards sent reinforcements when your vessel was lost. Or perhaps those who arranged your ship's destruction are ensuring no witnesses remain. Mason considered this. The sabotage of the Aurora had been too precise, too effective to be the work of amateurs. And the tracking device he'd found in their escape pod suggested someone wanted to make certain they were found dead or alive. We need to find out who's on those ships, he said, and we need to be prepared for either outcome. Agreed, Zira said. She studied him for a moment longer, then appeared to come to a decision. Your companion, the female officer. Where is she now? Mason hesitated. Collins was his ace in the hole, his backup plan if things went wrong. You did not truly believe I was unaware of her escape during the behemoth attack? Zira asked, her scales rippling with what might have been amusement. My warriors reported her movements, but I ordered them not to interfere. I wished to see what you would do. Testing me, evaluating you, she corrected. And you have proven interesting. Now, however, we must consolidate our position. If both ships approaching harbor those who wish to destroy the peace, we will need all resources at our disposal. Mason nodded slowly. She's gathering intelligence, trying to find a way to contact our people. Bring her here, Zira said. I give you my word as queen that no harm will come to her. We have 6 hours to prepare for whatever arrives with those ships. We should not waste it fighting amongst ourselves. Mason studied Zira's alien features, trying to detect deception. But Zorathian expressions were not human expressions. In the end, he had to rely on instinct, the same instinct that had kept him alive through decades of combat. I'll find her, he agreed. But first I want to know exactly what's happening in this outpost. What experiments you're conducting that were worth sabotaging our monitoring station. Zira's scales shifted to a deep, steady purple, a color Mason hadn't seen before. Very well, Colonel. Truth for truth. Follow me. Zira led Mason deeper into the outpost, past areas that had clearly been damaged in the behemoth attack. Zorathian workers were already repairing the structure, applying some kind of organic compound that seemed to grow and solidify before Mason's eyes. Their technology, he was reminded, was as much biological as mechanical. They descended several levels via a gravity lift, a tube of energy that slowed their fall to a gentle float. At the bottom, Zira pressed her palm against another biometric scanner, and massive doors slid open to reveal a laboratory complex unlike anything Mason had seen before. The chamber was vast, its ceiling at least 30 feet high, necessary to accommodate the Zorathians who worked at various stations around the perimeter. The center of the room was dominated by a large cylindrical tank filled with a luminescent fluid. Suspended within it was... Mason stopped in his tracks, his breath catching in his throat. The being in the tank was neither human nor Zorathian, but somehow both. Smaller than a full-grown Zorathian, but larger than a human with scaled skin and patches across otherwise smooth flesh. Its face was a haunting blend of features, the angular structure of Zorathian physiology softened by human characteristics. What is this? Mason asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The future, Zira replied simply. She approached the tank, placing a scaled hand against its surface. The fluid inside rippled slightly as if responding to her touch. Or one possible future. You've created a hybrid. Not created, Zira corrected. Simulated. This is not a living being, but a projection, a computer model of what might be possible with sufficient understanding of both genetic codes. As Mason looked closer, he could see that the figure wasn't quite solid, its edges occasionally shifting like a hologram with an unstable signal. The monitoring station, Mason said slowly. They discovered this. They discovered part of our research, Zira acknowledged, enough to misunderstand its purpose. They believed, as you initially did, that we were developing biological weapons. She gestured to other displays around the room, where complex molecular structures rotated in 3 dimensions. We are studying compatibility, Colonel, the fundamental barriers that prevent our species from true coexistence. Why, what's the point of this research? Zira's scales shifted to that deep purple again as she turned to face him fully. Because isolation is death, Colonel, for both our species. She led him to another display, this one showing 2 planetary systems side by side. Your solar system, she said, indicating the left display, and ours. Both face existential threats in the coming centuries. Yours a dying sun that will expand to consume your inner planets within 1,000 years. Ours a gravitational anomaly that is destabilizing our outer planets already. Mason stared at the simulations, watching as Earth was slowly engulfed by the expanding sun. In one, while in the other, Zarathian colony worlds were torn apart by gravitational forces. This is verified data, he asked. Your own scientists have calculated your sun's life cycle, Zira said, though I suspect they have not shared the timeline with your general population. As for our system, the anomaly was discovered only 20 years ago. It is why we expanded outward so aggressively, why we encountered your kind in the first place. You were looking for new worlds to colonize. We were looking for survival, Zira corrected. As were you, though you did not yet know it. She returned to the central tank, watching the simulated hybrid floating peacefully in its artificial womb. Our species are biologically incompatible, she continued. We cannot share worlds because our biochemistry is too different. What sustains life for one often poisons the other. We cannot reproduce together, creating a new generation adapted to both environments. So you're trying to find a way to change that, Mason said, beginning to understand, to make us compatible. To create a third option, Zira clarified. Not Zarathian, not human, but a new species that carries the strengths of both. One that could thrive on worlds hostile to either parent species. Mason circled the tank slowly, studying the simulated being from different angles. It was beautiful in its own way, alien yet familiar, like something from a dream. Even if this were possible, he said carefully, it would take generations. Centuries, maybe. For natural evolution, yes, Zira agreed. But with directed genetic manipulation, she left the implication hanging. You're talking about changing both our species, rewriting what makes us human, what makes you Zarathian. I am talking about survival, Colonel. Her voice took on an edge he hadn't heard before. When faced with extinction, adaptation is the only moral choice. Before Mason could respond, a soft alert chimed from Zira's communication device. She touched it, and a holographic image of a Zarathian warrior appeared. My queen, we have located the human female. She has accessed a communication terminal in the East Quadrant. Zira's scales flashed with alarm. Has she transmitted? No, Your Majesty. Our systems prevented external communication. She is attempting to override the security protocols. Detain her, but with care. I will come personally. The hologram vanished, and Zira turned to Mason with golden eyes now narrow with suspicion. It seems your companion did not merely gather intelligence, Colonel. Mason's mind raced. Collins was a communications specialist, and if anyone could break through the Zarathian security measures, it would be her. But what was she trying to accomplish? Take me to her, he said. Let me talk to her. Zira studied him for a moment, then nodded sharply. Very well. But understand this, if she has compromised our security, if she has revealed our location to those who wish us harm, the consequences will be severe. As they left the laboratory, Mason cast one last glance at the hybrid simulation, a being that was neither human nor Zarathian, but something new, a bridge between worlds, a future that might never come to pass if the next few hours went wrong. They found Collins surrounded by Zarathian guards, her hands secured behind her back with energy restraints that glowed with a pulsing blue light. She knelt before a communications terminal that had been partially disassembled components scattered across the floor where she had been modifying them. When she saw Mason entering with Queen Zira, her eyes widened in surprise, then narrowed with something like accusation. Colonel, she said stiffly, I see you've made friends. What were you trying to do, Captain? Mason asked, keeping his voice neutral. My job, Collins replied, establishing contact with UEDF, warning them about, she cut herself off, glancing at Zira. About our experiments, Zira suggested, her towering form moving closer to Collins. Or about something else you discovered. Collins met the alien queen's gaze with remarkable steadiness for someone kneeling in restraints. I found the data cache from our monitoring station. I know what happened to them. Mason felt a chill that had nothing to do with the planet's temperature. What did happen? They were executed, Collins said flatly, after they discovered the Zarathian research facility here, shot in the back while attempting to flee. Zira's scales darkened, patterns of deep red pulsing across her skin. That is not accurate. I saw the security footage, Collins insisted. Time-stamped, authenticated. Your warriors gunned them down on your orders. Mason turned to Zira, searching her alien features. You told me they triggered automated defenses, that their deaths were accidental. I told you what I had been told, Zira replied, her voice low and dangerous. It seems I too have been deceived. She strode to the terminal Collins had been working on, her long fingers, moving across the interface with practiced ease. A holographic display materialized, showing security footage of humans in UEDF uniforms running down a corridor of Zarathian warriors in pursuit. The footage ended with the humans being shot from behind. This is not possible. Zira murmured, her scales now pulsing with rapid patterns of blue and gold agitation. Mason guessed. These orders did not come from me. Then who? Mason demanded. Zira's golden eyes narrowed to slits. My brother's former second-in-command, General Drax. He oversees security for this quadrant. Convenient, Collins said bitterly. Blame the subordinate. Silence, human, Zira hissed, her height seeming to increase as she loomed over Collins. You know nothing of our command structures. If Drax ordered these executions, he did so in direct violation of my authority. And the experiments? Collins pressed, seemingly unintimidated. The hybrid research, was that unauthorized too? Zira's expression shifted, scales calming to a steadier pattern. The research is authorized, but not for the purposes you imagine. We seek coexistence, not dominance. So you say. Mason stepped between them before the confrontation could escalate further. The approaching ships, he said. One is Zarathian. Could it be this General Drax? Zira considered this, her posture slowly relaxing from its aggressive stance. It is probable. Drax commands the nearest battlecruiser. If he detected your vessel's destruction, he would investigate. And if he's been working against the peace, against your authority, Mason continued, he'd want to eliminate any evidence, including us. And you, my queen, Collins added unexpectedly. If he's willing to execute UEDF personnel against orders, what's to stop him from eliminating you as well? Make it look like humans did it, restart the war with him as the avenging hero. Zira's scales rippled with new patterns, surprised perhaps at Collins's rapid grasp of Zarathian politics. A bold strategy, but not impossible for one with Drax's ambition. She touched her communication device again. Bring the human female's restraints and escort us to the command center. We must prepare for Drax's arrival. As they moved through the corridors, Mason fell into step beside Collins. How much did you really find? He asked quietly. Enough, she replied just as softly. The hybrid research is real. But there's something else, something I couldn't access before they caught me. A sealed file labeled Genesis Protocol. Mason frowned. Any idea what it is? No, but whatever it is, they're protecting it even more carefully than the hybrid research. They reached the command center, which had been mostly repaired after the behemoth attack. Zarathian officers moved with purpose between stations, preparing for the approaching vessels. Zira took her position at the central command, dais the restraints removed from Collins as a gesture of tentative trust. Show me the approaching vessels, Zira ordered. A three-dimensional display materialized in the center of the room. Two ships were visible, moving through the cryosis system. The Zarathian vessel was larger, a battlecruiser bristling with weapons. The human ship was smaller, faster, a UEDF rapid response frigate. The Zarathian ship will arrive first, a tactical officer reported. They are on direct approach to our position. Have they attempted communication? Zira asked. No, my queen. They maintain communication silence. Zira's scales darkened. Unusual protocol for a friendly approach. She turned to Mason and Collins. Your vessel wouldn't normally announce itself before entering orbit. Standard procedure, Collins confirmed, especially approaching a potentially joint-occupied outpost. So both ships are behaving as if, Mason began, as if they do not wish to be detected, Zira finished, or as if they already know what they will find here. A heavy silence fell over the command center as the implications sank in. If both approaching ships were hostile, if both contained forces intent on destroying the fragile peace, then they were tapped between two enemies. Zira straightened to her full height, her scales settling into a pattern of steady, deep red determination. We have 4 hours until Drax's ship arrives. We must prepare. For what? Mason asked. We're outnumbered, outgunned. For survival, Colonel, Zira replied, her golden eyes meeting his. And for truth. Whatever Drax is planning, whatever your people may be planning, they did not account for one critical factor. "What's that?" A sound emerged from Zira that might have been a laugh. "Us, working together." She turned to her officers. "Clear the command center. I must speak with the humans alone." The Zarathian officers looked surprised but complied, filing out until only Mason Collins and Zira remained. "What I am about to share is known only to my most trusted advisors," Zira said, her voice lower now. "The Genesis protocol that your Captain Collins discovered is not a weapon or an attack plan. It is a contingency for exactly this scenario." She activated a secure terminal, her scaled fingers dancing across the interface. A new display appeared, schematics for what appeared to be a small spacecraft hidden beneath the outpost. An escape vessel, Mason realized, built for Zorathian physiology. "Originally, yes," Zira acknowledged them, "but modified recently to accommodate human passengers as well. When we began our hybrid research, I recognized the potential for complications, political resistance, perhaps even violence from those who oppose cross-species cooperation." Collins studied the schematics with a trained eye. "This could get us off-planet, but where would we go? Both approaching ships would detect us immediately." "Not if we use the planet itself as cover," Zira said. She manipulated the display to show a course that would take them around the dark side of Cryosis, using its magnetic field to mask their signature. "This vessel is equipped with stealth technology. If we time our departure correctly between the arrival of Drax's ship and the human vessel, we can escape undetected." "To where?" Mason asked. "To a nearby system with a small research outpost loyal to me personally. From there, we can establish secure communication with both governments, reveal Drax's treachery, and salvage what remains of the peace." Zira's golden eyes fixed on Mason. "But only if we work together." Mason exchanged a look with Collins. The plan was desperate, full of unknowns and potential for disaster. But the alternatives were worse: capture by Drax or death in the crossfire between two forces intent on restarting a war neither planet could afford. "We're in," Mason said. "But we need to know everything about the outpost, about your research, about what really happened to our monitoring station personnel. No more half-truths." Zira's scales shifted through several patterns before settling on that deep purple he'd seen earlier. "Agreed. Truth for truth, Colonel. Starting now." As she began to explain the full extent of her research and Drax's betrayal, Mason couldn't help but notice how her scales seemed to glow more intensely when she spoke directly to him. He told himself it was just a physiological reaction, a Zorathian equivalent of emphasis or focus. But something in the back of his mind wondered if it might be something more, something neither human nor Zorathian science had anticipated, something that would soon change everything they thought they knew about compatibility between their species. The command center had been converted into a war room, holographic displays showing defensive positions and escape routes. Mason and Collins worked alongside Zorathian officers, the previous hostility replaced by wary cooperation in the face of a common threat. Zira had revealed the full extent of Drax's betrayal, intercepted communications showing his collusion with human military officials, opposed to the peace plans to eliminate the monitoring station and blame it on a Zorathian purge, and finally his intention to destroy all evidence of the hybrid research. "He fears what it represents," Zira had explained, "the end of purity, the beginning of cooperation that cannot be undone." Now, with barely 2 hours remaining before Drax's ship arrived, Mason found himself alone with Zira in a small, adjacent chamber, reviewing the final escape preparations. "Your Captain Collins is impressive," Zira said unexpectedly. "Her technical skills rival our best engineers." "She was top of her class," Mason replied, "though I suspect she wasn't entirely truthful about her specialization. She seems more intelligence operative than science officer." "As were your monitoring station personnel, I suspect," Zira said dryly. "Both our governments send spies disguised as scientists. Trust remains elusive." Mason couldn't argue with that assessment. Trust between humans and Zorathians was tenuous at best, built on necessity rather than genuine understanding. Yet here he was planning an escape with an alien queen he'd been taught to view as the enemy. "The Genesis vessel is designed for a crew of 4, Zira continued. "Myself, you Captain Collins, and my chief science officer, Cora. She must come. The research data is coded to her genetic signature as well as mine. A precaution against exactly this scenario." Can we trust her? With absolute certainty, Cora is family, the equivalent of what you would call a cousin. She has opposed Drax's faction since the war began. Mason nodded, studying the escape route one more time. It was dangerous launching during a narrow window when Drax's sensors would be recalibrating for atmospheric entry, then using the planet's magnetic field to mask their signature until they could make a jump to the neighboring system. It could work, he admitted. It must work, Zira replied. Her scales shifted to that now familiar deep purple as she stepped closer to him. Even with her towering height, there was something almost vulnerable in her posture now. Colonel, James, there is something else you should know. The use of his first name caught Mason off guard. In all their interactions, she had maintained the formal distance of military titles. What is it? He asked. The hybrid research. It is not merely theoretical. Not anymore. Mason frowned him. But you said the figure in the tank was just a simulation. It is, but we have progressed beyond simulations in certain specific areas of compatibility research. Something in her tone made Mason suddenly alert, a prickling sensation at the back of his neck. What areas exactly? Zira's scales rippled with patterns he hadn't seen before, rapid pulses of purple and gold that seemed almost to form coherent shapes before dissolving again. Reproductive compatibility, she said finally. We believed it impossible. The genetic barriers too great. But recent breakthroughs suggested possibilities. Theoretical pathways that might, under very specific conditions, allow for successful cross-species fertilization. Mason's mind raced to catch up with the implications. Are you saying you've created actual hybrid embryos? No, Zira said, not artificially created. That technology remains beyond our capabilities. Her golden eyes fixed on his, unblinking. I am saying that under specific environmental conditions, natural conception might be possible. Extremely rare, but possible. The weight of her words slowly sank in. Mason stared at her, understanding dawning like a cold sunrise. The behemoth attack, he said slowly. When you were injured, the fluid that covered both of us, the one that glowed when exposed to air. An environmental catalyst, Zira confirmed. Combined with the unique electromagnetic conditions of this planet and the genetic predisposition of certain individuals. You're saying Mason couldn't finish the sentence, the concept too alien, too impossible to articulate. I am saying, Colonel James Mason, that preliminary bioscan results suggest I am carrying genetic material that is not Zerathian. Her voice was steady, but her scales betrayed her agitation, rippling with colors he couldn't interpret. Material that appears to be human, specifically yours. Mason felt as if the floor had dropped away beneath him. The concept was so far beyond his understanding, so completely outside his frame of reference, that his mind struggled to process it. That's not possible, he finally managed. Even with environmental catalysts, our species are too different. The catalyst fluid, Cora explained, entering the room and showing them molecular diagrams on a portable display, contains unique proteolytic enzymes that temporarily restructure cellular membranes, allowing genetic material to cross barriers previously thought impermeable. Cryosis's unusual magnetic field creates quantum tunneling effects at the molecular level, further facilitating genetic exchange that would be impossible anywhere else in the galaxy. So we believed, Zira agreed. Yet here we are. The impossible made possible through a combination of factors we never anticipated. The research, the planet's unique properties, the specific genetic markers you and I both carry. She trailed off, watching him closely. This changes everything, James, for both our species. Before Mason could respond, Collins's voice came through the communication system. Colonel, we have a problem. The Zerathian ship has accelerated. New arrival time estimated at 30 minutes. Reality crashed back with jarring force. Whatever this new revelation meant, whatever impossible future it might herald, they first had to survive the next hour. We'll continue this discussion later, Mason said, already moving toward the door. Assuming we live that long. Zira's hand caught his arm, her scaled fingers surprisingly warm against his skin. This is why the Genesis Protocol must succeed, James, not just for peace between our species, but for what might come after. Their eyes met one final time before they returned to the command center, human blue meeting alien gold, both filled with the same determination. Survival first. Then they would face the impossible together. The command center pulsed with frantic activity as the Zorathian ship entered Cryosis's upper atmosphere, its massive form visible even through the swirling blizzard that had returned with renewed fury. On the tactical display, the vessel's weapon systems glowed an ominous red, fully powered and ready to fire. "No hailing attempts," reported a Zorathian officer, scales flickering with tension. "They are conducting a combat approach." Queen Zara stood at the center of the storm of activity, her copper hair gleaming under the emergency lights, her scales now a steady dark crimson of battle readiness. Despite the crisis unfolding around them, Mason couldn't help but see her differently now, not just as an alien queen, not just as an unexpected ally, but as something science had declared impossible. A Zorathian carrying human genetic material. His genetic material. "Colonel," Collins appeared at his side, pulling him back to the immediate danger. "The Genesis vessel is prepped and ready, but we have a problem. With Drax arriving early, we've lost our launch window. Their sensors will detect us the moment we break cover." Mason's tactical mind immediately shifted to problem-solving mode. "We need a distraction, something big enough to blind their sensors temporarily. Or someone to delay them," came Zara's voice as she joined their huddle. Her golden eyes held a determination that transcended species barriers. "I will confront Drax directly. As his queen, he cannot refuse me without revealing his treachery to his crew." "That's suicide," Mason objected. "If he's coming to eliminate all witnesses, that includes you." "Not immediately," Zara countered. "Zorathian protocol demands formal acknowledgement of royal presence. It will buy you time to launch the Genesis vessel." "And leave you behind?" Mason shook his head. "No, there has to be another way." A new voice entered the conversation, a female Zorathian with scales of an unusual silver-blue hue. "There is another option," said Cora, Zara's chief scientist and cousin. "The behemoth." All eyes turned to her. "Explain," Zara commanded. "The creature is still in the vicinity," Cora said, bringing up a sensor display showing a massive thermal signature several kilometers from the outpost. "Our research indicates these beings are highly sensitive to certain energy frequencies. If we broadcast on that spectrum, we could draw it toward Drax's landing zone." Collins finished, quickly grasping the strategy. "Create enough chaos to cover our launch." "Precisely," Cora confirmed with what might have been approval in her alien features. Mason studied the tactical display, his decades of military experience, calculating angles, timing, risks. "It could work, but we'd need to coordinate perfectly. And we'd need someone to remain behind to trigger the broadcast at exactly the right moment." A heavy silence fell over the group as the implications sank in. Someone would have to stay behind, likely sacrificing themselves to ensure the others escaped. "I will stay," Cora said firmly. "The research data is coded to both my signature and the Queen's. Either of us can activate it at the secondary outpost, but only Zara can authorize its implementation across our government." "No," Zara began, but Cora raised a scaled hand in a gesture that seemed to carry special significance between them. Cora had been more than Zara's cousin and scientist. She had been her confidant since childhood, the only one who supported Zara's controversial ascension to the throne after her brother's death. "Our people need your vision," Cora had told her then, "and I will ensure they have the chance to see it fulfilled." Her sacrifice now was the ultimate fulfillment of that promise, protecting not just her queen, but the future Zara had always envisioned. "My queen, my cousin, my friend," Cora said, her voice carrying subharmonics that made Mason's chest vibrate. "This is the only logical choice. You carry something far more precious than research data now." Mason felt a jolt as he realized Cora knew about Zara's condition. The Queen's scales flickered with complex patterns before settling into reluctant acceptance. "Very well," Zara said, her voice steady despite the emotion evident in her scale patterns. "Begin preparations immediately. We launch in 20 minutes. As the others moved to their tasks, Mason caught Zara's arm. "There's something else we need to discuss. The human show it's still approaching. Even if we escape Drax, we'll have another enemy to deal with." "Perhaps not an enemy," Collins interjected, looking up from a communication console. "I've been analyzing their approach vector. It's the UEDF interceptor Captain Adams commanding." "Adams?" Mason's eyebrows rose in surprise. "John Adams. We served together in Kosovo." "Could he be trusted?" Zira asked, golden eyes intense. Mason considered carefully. Adams is old-school military, believes in chain of command, but also in doing what's right. If we could contact him directly, show him evidence of the conspiracy. Too risky, Collins warned. Any transmission could be intercepted by Drax's ship. Then we stick with the original plan, Mason decided. Escape to the secondary outpost, then establish secure communications with both governments. Show them the truth about what's happening here. A thunderous impact shook the outpost dust sifting down from the ceiling. On the external cameras, they could see Drax's ship landing on the plateau above the facility, its massive landing struts crushing ice formations as it settled. Time's up, Collins said grimly. They're here. General Drax of the Zarathian Southern Fleet strode into the outpost like a conquering warlord flanked by heavily armed warriors whose scale patterns indicated absolute loyalty to their commander, rather than their queen. Tall even for a Zarathian with scales of deep emerald that bore the ceremonial scarring of dozens of battles, Drax carried himself with the dangerous confidence of someone accustomed to power and willing to use any means to expand it. Zira awaited him in the main reception chamber, seated upon a makeshift throne, every inch the regal monarch, despite the emergency conditions. Mason and Collins had retreated to hidden observation positions, monitoring the confrontation through security feeds, while completing final preparations for their escape. My queen, Bond, Drax said, executing a bow that was technically correct but subtly mocking in its execution. What an unexpected pleasure to find you personally overseeing this remote outpost. General, Zira acknowledged coolly, your arrival is equally unexpected, particularly your failure to announce yourself before landing. Drax's scales rippled with what might have been amusement. A security precaution, Your Majesty. We detected unusual energy signatures in this sector. Possible human incursion. Indeed, Zira's voice remained perfectly controlled. How fascinating that you would detect such signatures given that this outpost's communications have been non-functional for some time, almost as if someone had deliberately disabled them. A flicker of unease passed across Drax's scales before he mastered it. A troubling coincidence, one I intend to investigate thoroughly. His golden eyes scanned the chamber. I see evidence of damage. What has occurred here? A frost behemoth attack, Zira replied. Quite unusual for one to venture so far from the polar regions, almost as if it were attracted to something. The verbal sparring continued, each participant probing for weakness while revealing nothing. Watching from their hidden position, Mason marveled at Zira's composure. She was buying them precious minutes with every carefully crafted response. The Genesis vessel is ready, Collins whispered. Cora has positioned herself at the broadcast station. We need to move now while Drax is distracted. Mason nodded but found himself reluctant to leave without knowing the outcome of this confrontation. Something in Zira's bearing suggested she had another play in mind beyond simply delaying Drax. On the monitor, the conversation had taken a dangerous turn. I must insist on inspecting your research facilities, my queen, Drax was saying, his posture becoming more aggressive. There have been disturbing reports of unauthorized experimentation, cross-species genetic manipulation that violates our most sacred principles. My research is conducted with full authorization of the High Council, Zira countered, but by all means inspect to your satisfaction. She made a gesture and a side door opened to reveal Cora standing there. My chief scientist will provide a complete tour. Mason tensed. This wasn't the plan. Cora was supposed to be at the broadcast station ready to trigger the behemoth distraction. What is she doing? Collins hissed. Before Mason could respond, Cora stepped forward, her silver-blue scales pulsing with calm determination. General Drax, she said, bowing formally, I would be honored to show you our latest breakthroughs, including some unexpected findings regarding the human monitoring station personnel who were stationed here. Drax's scales darkened noticeably. What findings? Perhaps it would be better to show you the data directly, Cora suggested. It's quite technical. A moment of tense silence followed as Drax visibly calculated his options. Finally, he nodded sharply. Very well. Lead the way, Scientist Cora. As they left the chamber, Zira rose from her throne and moved swiftly toward a concealed exit, one that would lead her to the rendezvous point for the Genesis vessel. Mason and Collins hurried to intercept her. What just happened? Mason demanded when they met in a service corridor. Cora was supposed to trigger the distraction. She is, Zero replied, her scaled features set in grim determination. But not as we planned. She has a different strategy, one that might give us even more time. What strategy? Cora discovered something in the security archives, something even I was unaware of. Footage showing Drax giving direct orders to execute the human monitoring station personnel. Evidence of his treachery that he believed destroyed. Collins's eyes widen. She's going to confront him with it. At the exact moment our sensors detect your human vessel entering the atmosphere, Zira confirmed, creating maximum confusion among Drax's loyalists and triggering the emergency protocols that will momentarily blind their ship's sensors. That's beyond dangerous, Mason said. It's suicide. Zira's golden eyes met his, filled with a sorrow that transcended species differences. Cora has made her choice, Colonel. Now we must honor it by ensuring her sacrifice is not in vain. They moved quickly through the outpost service tunnels, avoiding Drax's patrols. The Genesis vessel was housed in a concealed hangar beneath the main structure, accessible only through biometrically secured passages that recognized Zira's unique patterns. The vessel itself was smaller than Mason had expected, sleek and organic in design like all Zarathian technology, but clearly modified to accommodate different physiologies. The cockpit contained control interfaces adjustable for both Zarathian and human proportions. Impressive engineering, Collins murmured as they boarded. How long has this been in development? Since the peace accords were signed, Zyra replied, settling into the pilot's position. I always believed cooperation between our species was inevitable. I simply underestimated the form it would take. Her scales shifted momentarily to that deep purple Mason had come to recognize as meaningful, though he still couldn't interpret its exact significance. There was no time to dwell on it now. Collins took the co-pilot position, her technical expertise making her the logical choice despite her inexperience with Zarathian systems. Mason stationed himself at tactical, where weapons and defensive systems could be controlled. Pre-flight complete, Collins reported after a brief orientation. All systems green. We're ready when you are. Zira's scaled fingers danced across the interface, initiating launch procedures. Now we wait for Cora's signal. The minutes stretched endlessly, tension building with each passing second. On the tactical display, Mason could see Drax's warriors spreading throughout the outpost, clearly searching for something or someone. They know we're here, he said grimly. They're hunting us. Cora will not fail, Zira replied, though her scales betrayed her anxiety with rapid pulses of blue and gold. As if in answer to her faith, a massive energy surge suddenly registered on their sensors. The outpost's main communication array had activated broadcasting on a frequency that made the Genesis vessel's instruments momentarily scramble. That's it, Collins exclaimed. The behemoth call. Almost simultaneously, another blip appeared on the long-range scanners, the human vessel entering Cryosis's atmosphere. Perfect timing, Zira said, her voice tight with emotion. Cora has given us our window. She activated the launch sequence. The hangar doors above them slid open, revealing the howling blizzard beyond. The Genesis vessel rose silently, its advanced propulsion system creating barely a ripple in the snow as it emerged from its hidden dock. On the tactical display, chaos was erupting. The behemoth was charging toward Drax's landed ship, its massive form visible, even through the storm, as a mountain of ice and mist given terrible life. Meanwhile, alarms were sounding throughout the outpost as Cora apparently revealed her evidence to Drax himself. We're clear, Collins reported as they accelerated away from the outpost, hugging the contours of the frozen landscape to minimize sensor visibility. No pursuit detected. Mason continued monitoring the tactical display, watching as the human ship, the UEDF Interceptor, adjusted its approach vector toward the Zarathian vessel. Adams is heading straight for Drax. He doesn't know what he's flying into. Can we warn him? Collins asked. Not without revealing our position, Zira replied. We must maintain communication silence until we reach the jump point. Mason's jaw tightened as he faced the impossible choice: stick to the plan that might save the peace or try to warn his former comrade about the danger he was approaching. In the end, the decision was made for him as the tactical display suddenly lit up with weapons fire. Drax is firing on the interceptor, Collins exclaimed. Unprovoked attack. The human vessel took evasive action, returning fire with precision that spoke of veteran command. On the outpost sensors, more chaos was unfolding as the behemoth reached Drax's ship, massive limbs of semi-solid ice slamming into its hull. The distraction is working, Zira observed, guiding their vessel through a narrow canyon that would shield them from sensors. But we have only minutes before they realize we've escaped. Mason watched the battle unfolding behind them, his thoughts with Adams and his crew, and with Cora, whose sacrifice had made their escape possible. Another display caught his attention, a small alert on the medical monitoring system that was tracking Zira's condition. "Your vitals are spiking," he said with concern. "The stress is manageable." Zira cut him off. "Focus on our mission, Carnan." But Mason could see the strain in her posture, the way her scales were flickering between patterns in rapid succession. Whatever was happening inside her, this impossible joining of human and Zorathian genetic material, it was taking a physical toll. They reached the magnetic anomaly that would mask their jump to the neighboring system. Zira initiated the final sequence, the Genesis vessel's engines humming with increasing power. Jump in 3, 2, 1. A blinding light suddenly filled the cockpit as an explosion bloomed behind them. The shockwave hit moments later, sending the Genesis vessel tumbling end over end despite its advanced stabilization systems. "What happened?" Mason shouted over alarms that had begun blaring throughout the ship. Collins, fighting with the controls, managed to stabilize their flight path enough to check the sensors. "The outpost," she reported, her voice hollow with shock. "It's gone. Completely destroyed." "Cora," Zira whispered, her scales dulling to an ashen gray of grief. Mason checked tactical. "Drax's ship is damaged but operational. The behemoth is, I can't tell. The interceptor is withdrawing to high orbit." He moved to the communication controls. "We need to warn Adams about Drax. Tell him what's really happening." "No," Zira's command cracked like lightning. "We cannot risk exposure until we reach the secondary outpost. The evidence we carry is too important." "People are dying down there," Mason argued. "Good people on both sides being sacrificed for a conspiracy they know nothing about. And millions more will die if we fail in our mission." Zira countered, her golden eyes blazing with intensity. "The evidence of Drax's treachery, the research data that proves cooperation is possible, these must reach both our governments. Only then can the killing stop." The truth of her words hit Mason like a physical blow. This was larger than any individual life, even the lives of friends and comrades. It was about the future of two species that had spent too long trying to destroy each other. "Approaching jump point," Collins reported tensely. "Engines at maximum." On the tactical display, a new alert appeared. Drax's ship had detected them, was turning to pursue, but it was too damaged, too slow to catch them before they made the jump. "Jumping now," Zira announced, her fingers dancing across the controls. The stars outside the viewport streaked and blurred as the Genesis vessel tore a hole in space-time, leaping across the void to the neighboring system and to whatever future awaited them there. The secondary outpost was hidden on the third moon of a gas giant, its existence unknown to all but Zira's most trusted advisors. Unlike the military facility on Cryosis, this outpost was primarily scientific in nature, a research station built into the moon's natural cave systems, powered by geothermal energy that left minimal thermal signature. They landed in a concealed hangar carved from the moon's porous rock, greeted by a small contingent of Zorathian scientists who seemed both shocked and awed by their queen's unexpected arrival. Their surprise only increased when they saw the human passengers accompanying her. "Prepare the secure communication chamber," Zira ordered as they disembarked, "and bring medical equipment to my private quarters immediately." Her scales had taken on a worrying pallor, patterns pulsing erratically in a way that clearly concerned the other Zorathians. Mason caught her arm as she swayed slightly. "You need rest," he said quietly. "Later," she replied with characteristic determination. "First, we must contact both governments. Reveal Drax's betrayal before he can spread his version of events." The Outpost Communication Center was a marvel of Zorathian technology capable of sending encrypted transmissions that would be nearly impossible to intercept or trace. While Collins worked with the Zorathian technicians to establish connections with both Earth and the Zorathian High Council, Mason helped Zira prepare the evidence they had brought from Cryosis. "Are you sure about this?" he asked as they sorted through the damning files. "Once we reveal the hybrid research, there's no going back. Both our species will have to confront what it means." Zira's golden eyes met his, filled with a resolve that transcended physical exhaustion. The time for secrets is over, Colonel. Our future, both our people's future, depends on truth, however uncomfortable it may be. The communications were established simultaneously, a three-way link between the outpost UEDF High Command on Earth and the Zarathian Council chambers. On the split view screen, human generals and Zarathian elders regarded each other with barely concealed hostility, united only in their surprise at seeing Queen Zira and Colonel Mason together. "What is the meaning of this?" demanded General Richards Mason's superior. "Colonel Mason was reported killed when the Aurora was destroyed, and we received reports that Queen Zira had been assassinated by human agents," added a Zarathian elder, whose elaborate scale patterns marked him as a high-ranking counselor. "Yet here you both stand apparently in cooperation." "We have been the victims of a conspiracy," Zira began, her voice steady despite her weakening condition. "A plot engineered by those who wish to destroy the peace between our peoples, and we have evidence to prove it." What followed was a careful presentation of the facts they had gathered: Drax's unauthorized execution of the human monitoring station personnel, the sabotage of the Aurora traced to collaborators within the UEDF, and finally the truth about the research being conducted on cryosis. "Hybrid genetics." General Richards looked incredulous. "You expect us to believe this research was for peaceful purposes?" "The evidence speaks for itself," Mason replied, stepping forward. "Queen Zira's scientists weren't developing weapons. They were exploring ways our species could coexist, share environments that would otherwise be hostile to either species alone." "A noble goal," said the Zarathian counselor, though his scales betrayed skepticism, "but one that violates our most ancient taboos against genetic manipulation." General Drax was right to be concerned. Drax wasn't concerned, Zira countered sharply. He was afraid. Afraid that success would mean an end to the divisions he exploits for power. Afraid that cooperation would replace conflict. The debate continued, points and counterpoints flying back and forth across interstellar distances. Throughout it all, Mason watched Zira, carefully noting how she leaned more heavily on the console. As time passed, how her scales seemed to be losing their luster. Finally, as the discussions reached a critical point, Zira straightened to her full height and silenced the debate with a gesture that carried royal authority even across light years. "There is one more piece of evidence," she said, her voice carrying to the farthest corners of both chambers. "One that neither General Drax nor his human collaborators could have anticipated." She turned to Mason, a question in her golden eyes. He nodded slightly, understanding what she intended. It was time for the final truth. "The research on cryosis yielded an unexpected result," Zira continued, facing the stunned officials. "Under specific environmental conditions found only on that planet, Zarathian and human genetic material proved compatible." Murmurs of disbelief rippled through both audiences. "You claim to have created hybrids?" the Zarathian counselor asked, scales flickering with alarm. "Not created," Zira corrected. "Discovered the potential for natural conception." Her voice remained steady as she delivered the news that would forever change relations between their species. "I am carrying such a hybrid, a child with both Zarathian and human genetic markers." The silence that followed was absolute. On the Earth side, General Richards's face had gone pale. On the Zarathian side, the counselor's scales had frozen in patterns of shock. "Impossible," someone finally whispered. "I believe so too," Zira replied. "Yet it has happened. And while this specific instance may be the result of unique conditions that cannot be easily replicated, the fact remains our species are not as incompatible as we have always believed." Mason stepped forward to stand beside her. "This changes everything, not just scientifically, but philosophically, politically. It means we have a choice: continue fighting over territories that can support only one of our species, or work together to create a future where both can thrive." The discussions that followed were tense, filled with questions neither of them could fully answer. How had this happened? Was it replicable? What would the hybrid child be like? What were the implications for both species' futures? Through it all, Zira maintained her royal composure, though Mason could see the toll it was taking on her. When the transmission finally ended with agreements for immediate ceasefire, Drax's arrest and a joint scientific commission to verify their claims, she nearly collapsed. Mason caught her supporting her weight as Collins quickly summoned the medical team that had been waiting nearby. You need treatment, he said as they helped her to her private quarters. Whatever is happening inside you is unprecedented, Zira finished weakly. No Zorathian physician has experience with human Zorathian conception. They are uncertain how to proceed. The gravity of their situation hit Mason anew. They had survived Drax's betrayal, escaped cryosis, and potentially saved the peace, but now faced an entirely different challenge. One for which there was no roadmap, no precedent. In Zira's private chambers, Zorathian medical equipment hummed as physicians conducted scans of their queen's changing physiology. Mason stood nearby feeling oddly protective, despite knowing there was little he could do. The genetic fusion appears stable, reported the chief physician, a female Zorathian with mottled gray scales that indicated advanced age and experience. But it is placing unusual demands on Her Majesty's biological systems. Adaptations are occurring that we do not fully understand. Will she recover? Mason asked, not caring that his concern was obvious to everyone present. The physician's scales shifted in what might have been uncertainty. I believe so. The Queen's physiology is strong, but this is uncharted territory, Colonel Mason. We simply don't know what to expect. When the physicians finally left, promising to return with treatment protocols based on their preliminary findings, Mason found himself alone with Zira. She lay on a resting platform designed for Zorathian anatomy. Her copper hair spread across the surface, her scales glowing with a faint inner light that pulsed in rhythm with her heartbeat. You should rest, she said, surprising him. You've been awake for nearly 40 hours. So have you, he pointed out, taking a seat beside her platform. And you're the one growing an impossible child. A sound emerged from her that might have been a laugh. Impossible, she repeated, a word that has lost much of its meaning these past few days. They sat in companionable silence for a moment, both processing the magnitude of what had occurred and what was still unfolding. What happens now? Mason finally asked. With the peace with us, Zira's golden eyes studied him thoughtfully. The peace will hold, I think. Drax's faction has been exposed, their credibility destroyed. Your General Richards seemed genuinely shocked by the evidence of collaboration within his own ranks. And us, Mason pressed gently. Her scales shifted to that deep purple he had seen before, a pattern he now suspected might indicate emotional vulnerability, something rare for a Zorathian queen. That is more complex, she admitted. But protocols exist for this situation. No precedent in either of our histories. Then we make our own precedent, Mason said simply, one step at a time. He reached out hesitantly, placing his hand over hers, the first voluntary touch between them that wasn't dictated by crisis or necessity. Her scaled skin was warm, almost feverishly so, yet the texture was not unpleasant against his human flesh. I never imagined, Zira said softly, when we fought at Mars, when you defeated my brother, that we would find ourselves here. Enemies become allies, become something else entirely. Life is full of surprises, Mason replied with a slight smile. Some better than others. Zira's scales rippled with new patterns, something he was beginning to interpret as amusement or perhaps affection. Indeed, Colonel, indeed. A soft chime interrupted them as Collins requested entry. She entered bearing news from Earth confirmation that the conspirators within the UEDF were being arrested, that the interceptor under Captain Adams had safely returned to Earth space, and that preparations were already underway for the Joint Scientific Commission. They want you both to testify, Collins concluded, in person once travel is deemed safe. Mason looked to Zira, raising an eyebrow in silent question. We will go, she decided after a moment's consideration. Together, our child, she paused, the words still strange on her tongue, represents the future we've been fighting for, a future of cooperation rather than conflict. It is fitting that we should be the ones to introduce that future to both our worlds. As Collins left to make the arrangements, Mason found himself contemplating that future, uncertain, unprecedented, but suddenly rich with possibilities that neither humans nor Zorathians had dared imagine. It won't be easy, he said quietly. There will be resistance on both sides. Fear, prejudice. Of course, Zira agreed, her royal confidence returning despite her physical weakness. Change never is easy, but necessary change always finds a way. Like water through stone, like life in the void, it is inevitable. She placed her free hand over her abdomen, where something impossible was growing, a new life that was neither fully human nor fully Zorathian, but something altogether new. a bridge between worlds. Our child will never be alone, she said with sudden fierceness. That I promise James Mason. Whatever comes, whatever challenges arise, this child will know both worlds, both heritages, and will be stronger for it. Mason found himself believing her. Against all odds, against seemingly insurmountable biological barriers, they had created life together. Surely that same determination could forge a new path forward for both their peoples. Together then, he said, tightening his grip on her hand, one step at a time. The Joint Commission would establish a permanent research outpost on cryosis with scientists from both species working together to understand the unique properties that had made this miracle possible. Meanwhile, diplomatic teams were already drafting new accords that would transform the fragile peace into genuine alliance with provisions for shared territories, technological exchange, and mutual defense. The path ahead remained challenging, but for the first time it was a path both species would walk together. Outside the viewport of Zera's chamber, the gas giant rose over the moon's horizon, its swirling storms a palette of colors neither Earth nor the Zerathian homeworld had ever known. Different alien, beautiful reminder that the universe held more wonders than either species had yet discovered. Wonders they might now explore together as allies rather than adversaries, as creators of a future neither had imagined possible, a future that against all odds had already begun.